And we are good. All right, so I've got Photoshop open just because mainly it's going to be the first program that we take a look at or possibly get refreshed on. So, I mean, one of the first things that we could do is really go to Google Earth and check out this spot that we're looking at. I mean, that's something that you would normally do in any given situation. Of course, this is my plug for Brave Browser. If you're not using Brave Browser, I'm really sorry. It's basically a modified version of Chrome. So if you already like Chrome, you'll definitely love Brave because it's basically the same thing except it's removed all the ads for free and in fact pays you in cryptocurrency. It's actually really nice. In fact, I've already earned a couple of coin. I mean, that only amounts to really like 35 cents, but hey, it's a 35 cents I didn't have yesterday. So also, you can put really anything in here. Don't tell anybody I told you that, but it really just needs an email form and you can be on the internet. We're going to go ahead and go to Google Earth, one of my favorite places. And hot dog, the internet seems to be actually going at a decent speed. Maybe about 2012 speed. Not too bad. Hopefully I don't speak too soon. But really for this exercise, we want to take a look at sites, right? And we want to be able to scale our drawings. Now for some of us, you may remember exactly how to do this. All we need is a line of measurement that we know, right? In our case, I like to use the measurement of the scale that I'm using. So if I use a 1/8 scale, well, I make an 8-foot line because I want 8 feet to equal a certain degree. Or 16 feet or 20 feet. If I'm using the engineering scale, I'm going to stick to 20, 50s, 100s, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, I just want to make it easier for myself. So if I'm using 1/16 scale, I know that I can fit 16 feet in 1 inch. So that new measurement becomes an inch, right? So I do want to cover that again today. Sorry, I think I'm still in Paris. Yep, mentally as well. Oh, Manchester, not a bad one either. Let's go to San Antonio College, where our quote-unquote fictitious site is. Sorry, I keep calling it fictitious. It's more of a fictitious project. Clearly spoke too soon on the loading, but that's okay. We'll give it a sec. There's our building. It's so weird. It's like we're looking at ourselves right now. Anyway. Our site is just about over here. You'll start to recognize it. If you've got, a class in the VAC, there's where it is. But really, the portion that I gave you guys today is just this block right here. And again, what's nice about at least this Google Earth model is you can start to see some of the tree elements, right? And answer some more questions that you couldn't necessarily get in that 2D image that I gave you, right? For some of us, we're eventually going to add shade and shadow, and of course that is dictated upon the height of items, right? So if you have a bigger tree, it's going to have a bigger shadow. If you have a taller building, it's going to have a taller shadow, right? So again, some of that information can be, applied from Google Earth itself. However, we happen to, of course, be about 500 meters away. So in the long run, you could also go out there and see it for yourself. For instance, noticing that it's on a gigantic hill, as we probably all know and love if you've ever walked up all the way to Dewey or anything like that. But again, I just want to show it because, well, the first thing that I want to do is at least get a scale drawing just in case I didn't give you one today, right? Now, don't get me wrong, you don't need to do this step for our assignment because I've literally already given it to you. But just in case in studio, and you need to be reminded of how to get these items to scale, and because I need an image of it today because I only got a screenshot, I'm going to go ahead and do the process for you recorded. So that's about right. However, I need one more thing. I need some sort of measurement. So in my case, I'm just going to guess and put it at 120 scale. Not that it really matters for today. So in my case, I'm going to want 20 feet and as close to a straight line as possible. I'm going to hit done. And of course, it's going to keep that piece in there. It's important because, well, oh man, I guess I got to do it again. Apparently you can't close that. That's okay. Take two. Perfect. Apparently done does not mean done. Anyway. So I need a screenshot, and I definitely need that piece inside of it. So again, hopefully a review for a lot of us. I'm going to do Control-Alt-4 if I'm on a Mac, and make sure that piece is in there. More or less, it has about the area of which I gave you, so that should be okay. Sweet. Now the topography information, honestly, you could probably derive that it's a hill, right? And really, I've already given you the topography as well, but if you just wanted to be specific and you really wanted to get an accurate layer, just because I know I haven't shown everybody this, is the San Antonio hydrology map. Again, really for reference. But it is fantastic. Contours and hydrology, sorry. I really wish every other city had this for its city or its county, but clearly in the entire Bexar County, we have all the topography and all the water drainage for the city. And again, very helpful, especially when we're in places like San Antonio College. And we can go immediately to that block, and we can get that information quite nicely. Why they put it in orange, I'll never really know, but it actually comes up pretty well on the projector. Not actually so much my screen. There we go. But yes, the information is there. I could get a screenshot of that as well. That's not really a part of my exercise today. But again, really want to show off that workflow that we can accomplish. Sweet. So I could take a screenshot of that. In fact, I will. Why not? Of course, there's the Kohler house. Doesn't show the building though. Kind of strange. Anyway. So we got our screenshot, we got our scale, and we could even put those together in Photoshop, right? I know I've done it in Illustrator before, but honestly, these programs work about the same. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new file. I know that the assignment itself is requiring an 11 by 17, so I'm going to go with 11 by 17. Make sure that it's in inches, and of course create. I would recommend a 300 resolution. I know some people's defaults are like at 450. Just be kind of careful with that. If you have a really strong computer, that's fine. But 300 is probably the best way to go. If you don't have your rulers up, of course, you can always hit Control-R or Command-R, and those will toggle in. This icon to the far top right that looks, I don't even really know how to describe it. It looks like a window. If you click on it, make sure that you're in Essentials. Can't express that enough, because you're going to be like, man, there's no tools, especially in default, and especially on probably the school computers. Usually it revolts back to default. You can also even reset your Essentials if you just absolutely mess it up or have given yourself too much customization. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get some of those images in there and get them to some sort of scale. So I'm going to go ahead and file, place that image that I just took. So I'm going to place embedded, because I'd rather it not be linked if I accidentally delete the link. Sweet. And of course it's going to bring in that image with a nice little marker. Now just again, I know a refresher for a lot of us, we need an inch on this piece of paper. So I'm going to go ahead and hold shift and quite literally just click right in the ruler. All right, I'm going to just drag it out. If I hold shift, it's going to get a little bit more specific. And of course I chose 3 between 4, and that equals of course 1 inch. Now after that, I can click on the image or the layer just like I would in Illustrator, right? I can hit Command T or Control T for transform. Once I do that, it becomes into this editable mode, and very key importantly to hold shift so that it stays proportioned. Mine is actually defaulted the other way around. I have to hold shift to unproportional it because, well, I have a very bad habit of accidentally unproportionalizing my drawings. So of course I set it to be the other way. You guessed it, we got to make that line equal an inch, because after all it equals 20 feet. If I equal 20 feet to be an inch, it becomes 1 to 20, right? It's as simple as that. In our case, Google Earth, the way that it works is not by the end of that circle, but actually the midpoint of that circle. So that would actually be, and I'm kind of eyeballing it, yes, for the midpoint of those two pieces. Of course, I'll further to continue to transform my drawing. It looks like it needs to get much bigger. If I want to go for a 1 to 20 scale, again, not really specific to this project because I already gave it to you at a scale, but as a refresher. And because I told your professor that I would go over it again. Looks like I still got some time to go. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Command T again. Holding Shift, of course. And it looks like I may have unproportionalized it. So let's actually go back. Command Z is your best friend sometimes. And let's try that again. One to 20. And actually, since it's too big for the paper, I'll show you something else. Well, maybe I'm just a little off. A little bit smaller. And yes, this is one of those things that you kind of just have to keep going back and forth until it's just right. And for the sake of argument, that's pretty close. Not too bad. But once we have it set to that grid, we could really choose where it needs to be. While in this transform mode, I can also right click and change its scale. So say that, well, I got 1 to 20, but you know, it's actually too big for the paper. Maybe I want 1 to 10 instead. Well, I just need to reduce it by 50%. So in my case, scale, oh, maybe it's off in my window. Where's it at? Where'd it go? Is it up here? Nope. Doesn't look like it's activating, or it is, but I just can't see it. And actually all those little sounds indicate that it's somewhere that I cannot see. That's okay. I'll take the piece itself, transform, edit, transform, scale. Oh, it's popping up somewhere. That's very annoying. Is it on one of these screens? No. Let's see what's available here. We could flip it. Not exactly scale, but okay. It usually brings up a property window. And if you're testing it actually at the moment, you might actually see it as well. It could just be because I'm plugged into 3 other screens and my computer doesn't know where to put it. It's probably not that. But either way, you should see something that brings up a percentage. That way you can change it from 100 to 50%. In my case, it just does not want to show it. Unless there's some other properties bar that I'm unaware of. After all, I don't know everything. So sometimes you just got to go look for it. Seems to be with color. Perhaps another window. Show all windows. Oh. Not what I'm looking for. Quite alright. I don't have to show you after all. But it's something that we can get to, and it is technically a scale drawing at 1 to 20, thanks to our grid lines. From here, I really want to show more what I'm thinking about the assignment. So, for the sake of argument, let's make it look a little bit more like the piece of trace paper that I gave you, or the image that I gave you, and at least fit it onto the page. Fine enough for today. So, a couple of things that I can do from here is, well, I mentioned that it needs to be layered. I mentioned that it needs to be a diagram of some sort. So, the way that I want to represent that is really up to me, right? Whether it be a circle, whether it actually be much smaller on the page, whether I just need to actually get a base layer of everything and then maybe just copy it 3 times and add a wind layer, add a sun layer, and add a pedestrian layer. Those kinds of things I'll probably want to do analog, right? I don't know about you, but drawing arrows in Photoshop can be quite cumbersome, however, not impossible. So for instance, I could take this layer and of course make new layers, right? And even start to draw arrows. Not a huge fan of that though. However, some of us can draw some pretty good arrows. What I would like to do is actually bring in my layers. So I'm going to go to File, bring in some more, and place embedded. In my case, I should have. Question is it downloaded? And it's not. We'll have to wait a second. But essentially, I want to scan my drawings and bring them in, right? Sorry, I spoke too soon about the internet. Perfect. Oh, it's thinking about it. And it's there, right? So a couple of things that you may notice is, well, there's a white background and I definitely don't need that. It's the wrong way, so I definitely want to change that. And it clearly at two different scales, so I might need to change that. In most cases, as long as you take the same image that you trace from with your trace layers, they should line up, right? So be very careful about that proportioning. Often, actually, it's the mishap of your proportioning that makes the layers never line up, right? However, there's a couple of things we could do from here. Now, we could do it the hard way, and we could remove the white from this drawing, right? And we could sit here and get the magic wand tool and basically just sit there and try to eliminate it. It's going to be like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to do, right? When I hit delete, it didn't even do anything because it's like, I don't even know what to do. So in my case, there's actually a better way. I'm going to right click on the layer itself, and I don't know if I've shown this to too many of you guys. You can take that layer, you can take the blend mode, change it to multiply. And if it hasn't removed the white already, you can further refine the drawing and remove the white. But it has done it by default just because, well, it was a pretty good scan. And as you can see, now I have those same lines, but with a transparent background. For the sake of argument and being able to see it a little bit better, let's go with site base image. And of course, drafted lines base image. That'll work nicely. Now in my case, I want to make these line up a little bit better, so I'm going to make one of those transparent or decrease its fill. In fact, that's actually looking pretty good if I wanted to print somewhat of the base image as well. Like I said, it's open to interpretation. I really want to see what you guys can come up with and what you are going for, right, in terms of communication. Do you want to use some of the map in its materials? Maybe. Do you want to use some of those trees? Probably don't recommend it. I bet you could draw a better tree and even create a tree diagram if you wanted to. So you could even remove the trees. You could keep the cars and keep the streets if you wanted to. It's up to you to decide what you really want to blend, of course, using these tools. Of course, the first thing I need to do is, of course, make them match each other. So I need to take one of these layers and at least get it pretty darn close. There's no way I got it that close, but there we go. It's a little too small. So I'll take that piece, Command T, and fake it till I make it. Not too shabby. Although it looks like the buildings have moved or has possibly come from a different trace piece of paper. Now, again, I can kind of fake it a little bit, right? And at least get the buildings to adhere to the drawing. You guys see what I did there? I didn't hold shift and it deproportionalized the building. Something you may have to do, at least in my case, because, well, these aren't coming from the exact same layer, which is fine, at least for tutorial today. But of course, in your case, you'll want them to line up quite perfectly. I can even use the arrow tools to just bump it just a little bit here and there. As soon as I press enter, it basically makes it stationary. And that's looking pretty good so far. I mean, just as a hybrid drawing, there's definitely a digital component, such as the image itself, and the arbitrary lines that I have. Not too shabby. So what's next? I mean, what could we possibly add to this? At least as a base image. Well, I may want to exaggerate, say, the shadows, or redraw them even. I could even add a shadow layer, or in our case, I might want to remove some of the items that I feel are a bit in the way, if you will, right? So in my case, I'm going to turn that off real quick and possibly just use my lasso tool to remove the streets, right? The shadow quality is actually something I really like about this back image. So let's test a few things. Let's get that back image. We're going to go ahead and make a copy of it just in case I absolutely ruin it. So in our case, it's called duplicate layer, which is next to delete layer of all places. Yeah, duplicate. Doesn't really matter what it's called, just really kind of saving it just in case I mess up. So in my case, yeah, there's some things I want to get rid of if I really do want to use this at all. In our case, maybe I just want to get some qualities out of it. So, well, maybe I don't want these buildings actually. I want to replace them with maybe a material that I want to do. It may require removing some of these tree elements. That's okay. Oh, there we go. Make sure you're actually on the lasso tool. I can even hold shift to keep perfectly straight lines. It's usually pretty nice, especially when you're drawing 45 shadows or making them up. I can hold shift to add to my selection. You'll see a little plus sign come about. Again, I know a lot of this is probably old hat, but maybe not everyone has got it. Maybe I want to go around these trees a little bit. Definitely can with that lasso tool. Add that to my selection. And maybe I want to restructure this roof, or at least in terms of its material. Or actually, matter of fact, maybe I want to keep these things. Not a bad idea. And maybe I change all the grass and the trees to an analog. So again, this is what I meant by experimentation. You're welcome to not, in fact, follow my tutorial exactly. Really, this is just to kind of explain the tool and how it's used itself, not to necessarily do exactly what I do graphically. So we got that piece, and maybe after all, I'm actually going to keep these pieces, so maybe I keep this one as well. I'm going to hold shift and add to my selection. Don't really want the 160 in there, but I guess it'll have to stay. But good, we have some pieces. I'm going to go ahead and reverse my selection. So I'm going to select the inverse of it and just go ahead and erase. So in my case, it needs a rasterized image. That's okay. I'm going to right click and rasterize it as soon as I find it. Oh, is it not there? Oh, convert to smart object first. That might do it. Erase. No, it definitely wants a rasterized object. That's okay. Usually it's in here. I do not have the greatest eyesight, so sometimes finding these small things takes me a little while. But there is definitely usually a rasterized layer. However, if it won't, we can go to adjustments. Actually, I forget how to rasterize it manually. Bear with me one moment. Pretty sure it's called rasterized layer. I did? Thank you, sir. Oh, there it is. Not all layers, but in this case, not a bad idea, I guess. Go ahead and rasterize them, see what that does. And just like that, voila. So in my case, now I have a little bit of both going on, right? And you can kind of see the advantages of doing something like that, right? So for instance, it saves me time from, well, maybe in studio I need to actually show an existing situation, and I don't necessarily want to remove everything from the existing situation. However, for this assignment, there's not really a right or wrong answer here, right? It's just really what the studio can come up with, right? But at least there's an effective tool of blending both of those two digital and analog components. From there, well, I gotta add maybe the rest back, or maybe I've removed too much, right? Well, thank goodness I made an extra copy. I could always get that back, right? So again, there's something about just kind of practicing these workflows, right? Kind of thinking a little 3 steps ahead before you necessarily take one step. Just so you can actually give yourself a couple of options, because, well, you're a designer. You may not know exactly what you want to do until the very second that it needs to happen. In our case, I'm going to see if I can get this to fit a little bit better to what I traced. So I can hold shift and you'll see I can squish the drawing, I can expand the drawing, and do a lot of things there. In my case, just the realignment of things. Obviously, I guess I could take this little piece as well and realign it to the drawing, but for the sake of tutorial and timing, it makes a lot of sense to just do it this way. That's about right, at least for the top one. Oh, somebody's at home. And that's looking pretty good. I'll go ahead and hit enter. I can hit Command D for deselecting something. I know that's probably old hat as well, but telling you, the commands of these programs go a long way. You can go a lot faster when you know the shortcuts and things like that. Secondarily, I might want to fill it in with maybe my own components. I'm actually a huge fan of white circulation. That way I can even add my own diagrams to them or manipulate them in themselves quite nicely. Another thing that could be addressed here, if you guys want to do these 3-dimensionally, I know there's actually something we do in freehand too, where we turn the drawing 45 degrees and we draw a lot of verticals up, right? And we suddenly make sort of an axon, if you will, of this drawing. Feel free to do something like that, especially if you were just absolutely bored by this assignment and you've probably done it maybe even once or twice, especially if you've had me once or twice. Feel free to make it your own. After all, again, the end goal here is the portfolio. However, a couple things more. Let's show you how to at least put some of those items in. For instance, well, I could use markers. I could make a marker layer. Sure, I could do that. That's going to take some time for this tutorial. So, well, maybe I want to actually fill in my analog lines with something actually more of a digital component. So in my case, I don't normally go to Google, but let's go to Google. What's today's holiday, Google? Looks pretty interesting. Obelisk. Architecturally, that's phallic, but okay. All right. Let's go with grass texture. Material. And you know what? I kind of want a watercolor feel. Bam. I don't have to do a thing, except maybe manipulate some of this. Now, don't get me wrong. I could actually watercolor and bust out the paper, and I could scan that in, and I could do all that, just like Professor Tunks might have even shown you if you've ever had him for computer graphics. He has an excellent archive as well that I hear he even shares. So be on the lookout to take his course if you are so lucky. But in my case, I want to go for something relatively flat, right? Something that I could probably manipulate, something that kind of looks like grass, kind of doesn't look like grass. In fact, that's actually something I really appreciate. It has a lot more white space in there, and I could probably mix and match and tile this a little bit. I see a lot of opportunity, and after all, I do need to think 2 or 3 steps ahead. So that's looking pretty good. Yeah, it actually looks kind of digital, and something like that would just be too saturated. I might have to do a little bit more work to that. I might have to lighten it up a little bit. That might be too lightened up, right? There's kind of maybe not enough to work with. So again, I'm kind of picking the happy medium in between. And another great feature for Google is once you click on an image, it starts to produce something at least a little bit more related to that. Finally, they got the Pinterest model attached to Google. But that was not the case a couple of years ago, so nice to see some improvements. You're going to right click on the image, of course, and actually open the image in a new tab, because instead of the thumbnail, it'll directly go to there. If you have a Mac, you can quite literally just drag this image in there. If you have a Windows, I think it works as well, but sometimes has some mishaps. So, well, this isn't going to do it for at least the whole thing. I can't just stretch this whole thing across and be like, grass, done, right? I may need to tile it, I may need to make it my own, or I might just decide a different image if this scale's just a bit too small or too big or whatever it might have to be. You're going to run into some issues, and that's of course accounted for. Now in my case, I want my lines to be above it, right, and sort of use it as a soft background tool, so I can always hide everything else and just work on that single layer. In my case, I want to be proficient and organized, so I'm going to call it my grass layer and start duplicating it, right? For instance, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger in some cases. I can copy that layer, paste it, not in transform mode, but in others. I can take that piece, start to tile it, make it match with other pieces. When in doubt, using the brick tile can go a long way, right? So pasting again, transform. And again, I'm just using command keys, really not having to do a whole lot of work here. Maybe match that one a little bit more. There's kind of these hard lines in there. What do I do for that? Well, honestly, I usually just count on that nobody's gonna actually notice. I mean, that's pretty, honestly, a hard line to notice if you're not looking for it. But I could also take these pieces, transform them, and flip them, right? If I wanted that to match a little bit more. Usually going for a mirrored method or can easily remove a line, right? Because, well, nobody sees the mirror in the mirrored reflection. But yeah, it's starting to make this nice piece of it. I could take all three, copy, paste, and start doubling my workload. Again, just another nice thing about these tools is the ability to copy on demand. Now in my case, it's not working out so well, so I might have to fake it till I make it, and that's looking okay. But there's a lot of lines in there, at least in terms of grid lines and things like that. So what could I possibly do? Well, two things. I could leave it and just hope that my professor doesn't see the tiledness of everything, or I could start to blur it out, right? I can make this all one layer. So I'm going to take all these grass layers, I'm going to right click and flatten or merge those layers, excuse me. So it's just going to make those layers become one piece, which is kind of nice, and I could further refine it and blend it together. Some of the tools that maybe you haven't been introduced yet nearly as much in architecture, which is what I try to do, at least in Graphics 3, is some of the stuff that I really haven't talked about, such as like the sponge tool, the burn tool, the dodge tool, because these are actually quite nice, especially if they're a little bit more hardness and a bit bigger in size. It can really start to blend up some of the colors. As you can see what it's doing there, it's starting to really get rid of that line. We don't have to have that tiled look, and in fact we don't want it either. This does require a little bit of extra work, but it's not bad. Of course, you can control the hardness by right clicking on your tool and start to get that line to fade away. Of course, that's the dodge tool. Try the burn tool. Really, it just makes things a little bit darker, which is kind of nice in some cases where you need it, or if you're trying to blend in two colors together, can sometimes be nice as well. After all, I'm trying to make this image my own and get away from this tiled look, so a couple of things may need to be achieved. In my case, another one of my favorite tools is definitely this guy, the smudge tool. I mean, it just sounds cool, smudge. Anyway, it is quite nice because now I can push some of these things into other realms. I wouldn't get too much hardness on it because, as you can see, it starts to look like a goo effect. However, there is Command Z, so if you in case go too much, and it probably does work a little bit better in the short side. After all, I'm really just trying to get rid of some of the funky line quality, so I'm pushing the green over here, keeping the darkness, and really this has come out of just experimenting, right? But really just trying to match and get rid of that tiled line. Now what's nice is, well, if I do this correctly, I really only have to do it once, and I can simply take this piece, bless you, and make it my own tile. For instance, I can make this a lot smaller, select the inverse, and erase the other piece that I don't want. Now I got a completely new tile that doesn't it half comes from the internet and half, well, I kind of made it myself. I could further even change the color or really just anything about it. I can remove the white from it just like as we saw in the blending layers. That might be helpful. I can change its vibrance. Actually, one of my favorite tools is to put 100% vibrance so it gets a really rich color, and then actually dial back the saturation by a -26 to 30. Again, some people say, well, sir, that looks exactly the same. I beg to differ, right? I think it's a little bit more soft and a little bit more balanced in terms of its color. And actually, you can tell the lines are a little bit less there, can't you? Right, if you were really paying attention. But again, that's kind of the end of my game here, is trying to make my own tiled piece so that I can further manipulate it for my drawing. So in my case, well, don't really need those right now. I really just need this part for grassy areas. So looks like I forgot a piece. That's okay. We'll go ahead and take that piece. While we're transforming it, we'll put it over here real quick and erase that piece that I obviously don't need. Maybe a little quicker than that. If you've ever had me before, I've definitely talking about the Toy Story 1 and the Toy Story 4 effect, right? The reason Toy Story 4 is so much better than Toy Story 1 is not because it came out 14 years later, even though, yes, I'm sure that has a lot to do with it. But in fact, if you look at Toy Story 1, it's too perfect. The objects are perfect geometries. The textures are very, very crystal clear and crisp. Something that we don't actually see in reality. In fact, if you ever microscopically view into something, it'll drastically change your world and how you see it because it's filled with imperfection. So in the digital realm, we have to implicate that as well. We have to add kind of our human-like tendency for imperfection. After all, it is what makes really things perfect, is knowing what is imperfect. Anyway, so we'll take those pieces. I'll go ahead and scale them up for this large grassy area I've got here. Keep in mind, I don't really need the whole thing. After all, I could trace this and of course get rid of what I don't need. So for instance, at the street, get back in here and really remove what I don't need. Even in the building, or I could decide to use this to hide my buildings, right? And my building's gonna naturally cover some of those items anyway. Not if I accidentally erase my base image though, my bad. Well, let's get rid of that. Maybe I want to keep that grassy area to maybe start the next one. Maybe this is slightly grassy as well, so maybe I just take down the hardness for some of these areas, make it a little fuzzier. Obviously, we don't need any grass in the parking lot. So again, I could either trace the parking lot or just simply fake it till I make it. I kind of like these little mishaps, right? The little blending of the edge, right? Because again, that starts to be that Toy Story 4. It starts to have a human-like quality to it. Where it doesn't make sense is, of course, having grass where grass should not be. So at the end of the day, as subjective as we can be, of course, we need to apply some critical thinking skills. Again, you don't have to take all this time like myself. We could just take those pieces again. Probably should have made a copy of it because now I'm going to be stuck with that piece, but that's okay. Somebody got voiceover in? Dun, 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 dun. So obviously I'm going to put these in the spots where, and if you could turn down your computer, whoever that is, please. We are recording, thank you. So I'll take that piece and get the rest of my grass over here. It looks like we do need some grass over there. Guys, seriously, whoever that is. Oh. It's really going through the whole thing, isn't it? Anyway, I could sit here and just meticulously go through this and try to, delete some of these lines. And really, what I like to do to keep a little more organized is I even take those same grass layers that I'm using and of course merge those layers, because I really just want one grass layer. I don't want like all these different grass layer 1, grass layer 2. And again, I think the shorter this layer panel is, the easier it is to, of course, work in the drawing. But in terms of the base image today, actually that was a brilliant mistake. I kind of like it. Anyway, there's no such thing as mistakes, right? Just happy accidents, at least according to Bob Ross. So in my case here, of course, I can go in here meticulously and delete obviously what is not needed, right? Such as the parts on the road. I can hold shift and keep a straight line, actually quite easily. I find it to be, honestly just as time consuming, and I start to, get a better feel for the project as well. Also, if I give it more of that human quality and I just draw it and erase it myself, it doesn't look like the computer did it anymore, right? And again, a reason why I use a trackball mouse, right? I mean, there's a lot more freedom in that, and I can be a little bit more particular about how I'm drawing with my thumb, which is still weird to say. But there is another option, right? If you find that to be a little bit easier, you can also use the lasso tool. You can also use sometimes even the magic tool. So in my case, I want to use it on the right layer and possibly get some of my image. As you can see, it gets everything except the black line, which might be okay, right? So let's go over to my grass layer and hit erase. Not exactly what I wanted. It's kind of working there a little bit, but again, not exactly what I wanted. Might be the best way to actually is just, when in doubt, lasso tool it. So in my case, I'm trying to keep the green here. Might have to lasso tool around. Obviously, I don't need grass in the parking lot. So when you're tracing this as well, it's good to be cognizant of what you're tracing, which is why we're even doing this exercise. But again, I can make sure I hit the erase layer on that piece, or in my case, actually the inverse, sorry. So I'll right click, select the inverse, and I want to erase everything that is not that piece, right? As you can see here, of course, effectively making it a lot easier. I no longer have to worry about accidentally erasing this piece because it won't. In my case, that's probably easier to just go around, and still gives it a nice little anomaly. Again, hopefully a review for most of us, but again, hopefully a nice refresher for some. Not too shabby. There's a lot to erase. But as you can see, it doesn't look like a tiled image from the internet anymore, right? And that's truly what's important here, guys, that it doesn't really matter how it gets there or why it gets there sometimes, but the effective communication of it, right? Is it too saturated? Is it too dark? Is it trying too hard to be grass? Or should it just represent grass as the color and the beautiful watercolorness that it has, right? Maybe it suddenly starts to be that blending component between analog and the hard digital. Now there's this quasi analog / digital to, of course, sandwich those together, if that's even making any logical sense. But hopefully, as you can see, it can be done quite quickly without myself talking so much. But let's continue, because I can further develop this drawing, say, for a diagram for another base image. So for instance, well, maybe I don't want this huge flat look. I don't just want one image on this thing. Maybe I do want to break it up into 3 and then maybe have a small big one, right? Why not? So let's say I was completely done with this process, and again, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to copy all these or duplicate them. I don't know if you can duplicate multiple layers at once. Oh, sweet. Can I group them too? It doesn't look like it. That's okay. I can group them now using this little folder, and I'm gonna say backup lines, right? Just in case. Because why not? Who wants to do that all over again, right? So in my case, I want to flatten the image except for that piece. So I'm gonna go ahead and take all of this. I'm gonna have to unlock the background, and that actually just signifies that it's a smart object, so that's okay. And I want to take this piece and I want to merge these layers. And the reason is at least in this situation, I'm done, right? I'm done with my base image. I've maybe got a couple of lines. I've started to hybridize some things, but keep in mind I still haven't touched upon the sun, the wind, or the pedestrians, right? So this is kind of just my base, if you will. So I'm going to take that piece, I'm going to further transform it, right? And you know what? I kind of want to make it look sort of quasi three-dimensional. So all I'm doing here is on the Mac, I'm holding Command, right? On Windows, you'll hold Control over your transforming points, right? So let me just say that one more time again, back up. All I did was do Command T for transform, and then you're gonna hover over a specific point and hold Control. You'll see that it actually changes the cursor, right? It turns into a white triangle. But now I could do something a little bit different, right? I mean, it's still kind of 2D, it's kind of quasi 3D. You guys kind of see it, right? What's funny is it's still 2D, right? But that's looking pretty neat. I could also do that at different angles. Maybe I didn't want that angle. Maybe I kind of want to do it this way. I can hold, again, Command if I'm on the Mac, or Control if I'm on Windows. And I can really delegate that perspective. Obviously, I want to choose something that just honestly just goes straight down. And you should be able to start to see it, right? I could do the same thing to the other points and further refine maybe the orthogonal or dramaticness of the drawing. All right, let's go with the dramatic mode today. Why not? That's pretty dramatic. I could do it to all four sides. Maybe I kind of want to get that idea of the hill coming in. Maybe. So of course, maybe I'd want to put these points a little bit lower and start to make it feel like I'm communicating something here. There's a reason why the designer chose to show it this exact way. Now you may not know why you did that yet, or obviously it's just for the sake of this exercise, but eventually I want you to have it in your head first, right? And see it before, of course, we try to make it, which is very hard to do while you're learning a computer. Anyway, practice makes perfect, or at least perfect practice makes perfect. I'm gonna go ahead and hit enter, just because I want to keep that, and I want to further scale it to start to compose my diagrams. Now I forgot that to unselect that piece. Hey, I'm human too. Everybody makes mistakes. I kind of like it though. You know, it's just kind of there. And in fact, let's figure out how to get rid of it. Is it a piece that maybe didn't go away? And it looks like it may be. Part of my group? Nope. It's really just a part of this image. Alright, well, it's gonna have to go. I'm gonna hit delete, or sorry, erase. And in my case, it's gonna be like, hey man, you gotta select a layer first. That's okay. So we got that piece. Right now, I don't know about you, but I can't stand the checker bound background. I start to go like this a little bit. It starts to give me vertigo. So I'm gonna make a new layer and call it my background layer again. And I'm gonna take that piece. Why would I do it all over again? I'm just gonna copy and paste them. Now in my case, I should probably copy and paste one that is relieved of all these faux pas of myself. Again, that's really just for the sake of going really fast for a tutorial. You shouldn't have this problem because you'll diligently go through erasing what you create, right? But I can take that piece, again, Command T, and go ahead and move it for my diagram. Maybe I want to show two instances of something quite particular. Oh, that's pretty cool. I didn't know you could do that. Anyway, let's take diagram 1, Command T, and maybe move that up a little bit more. I could even further align them, right? If I just wanted to make sure they were in the exact same spot, I could pull out some grid lines and really dial that in. I could switch between layers. I think I'm pretty sure I could even use my graphic keys. Maybe not. Got to be in transform mode, that's okay. And further align them. Sweet. That's looking a little too close to the other one, or I should say too far. Yeah. And last but not least, of course, we'll have 3 diagrams, so take that last piece and copy it again. Could take all 3, move them at the same time. It's looking pretty good so far, besides all the randomness. Anytime that you're in the transform mode, it's best to hit enter. That way it sort of completes that transformation. But from here, I should be able to flatten it. Again, be very careful about flattening or merging layers because it can't be undone, which is why I made a whole nother copy of it just in case. So, of course, I'll merge those layers, and as you can see, it's all one piece again. I'm going to hit erase and just get rid of what I don't need. Of course, I forgot to fill in my background layer. That's okay. I can use my fill tool, which doesn't seem to be activated. I forget where fill is. Fill as in a bucket tool, not fill as in a guy. Okay, there we go. Fill bucket tool. Let's go with sort of an off-white. That is not off-white. There we go. But yeah, I wanted to go for the off-white. That way, of course, that you could still see that white hovering box around it. But again, I know this is going very fast, and we will just have one more Photoshop tutorial for this exercise. But again, that's why I'm recording it, and that way you can follow along. Obviously, there's a lot we can do here all in one file, guys. Keep in mind, if this starts to get too complex for your computer, there is nothing wrong with doing it in a separate file and then bringing it into, say, like a home base file, right? Because some of our computers are just not as strong. However, if you're working on the school computers, those are literally the strongest. You can't beat a desktop, right? Even a really old desktop can outdo a brand new laptop, because when we buy a laptop, what it is that you're paying for is actually the mobility of computing. Really, that's why they cost so much. But they're really not as powerful as actually a desktop, or as cost efficient. You can buy a really awesome desktop for that $3,000 that you would have paid for a laptop, right? And have a 4 times stronger computer. So keep that in mind, and of course, anytime that you do these things, it's all by our budget anyway. But yeah, at least for today's tutorial, just to kind of recap, we went over scaling a Google drawing, right? We went over importing some of those line drawings and manipulating so that we can get rid of the white background, right? The next thing that we did was add some different materials, such as grass, or even keep some of the digital materials that we got from Google Earth. Lastly, we were able to take and frame these individual diagrams. That way I can print this out and I could make a whole nother analog layer. In fact, I could do my sun diagram, my wind diagram, and my pedestrian diagram all at the same time, all in the same layer if I wanted to. But I might want to do this first, because who wants to do all that by hand? See what I'm saying? What I'm trying to get at least across to you guys is I want you to work with both, right? Where you feel a little uncomfortable about the analog, switch to digital. When you feel a little uncomfortable about the digital, keep going with the digital. No, what I'm trying to say is mix and match. What I'm not trying to do is give an exact prescription. I'm not a doctor, and I don't want you to actually do it exactly my way. I want you to do it or find your way, right? And of course, doing this. That being said, are there any questions that I could tag on to this video? Really important, guys. Some of you may have the exact same question, right? And if you don't, please, during these tutorials, especially if I'm going really fast, write down a simple question. It goes a really long way. Like I said, somebody else might have the exact same question, and it's a lot better to get it online. That way, of course, you can review that question. Any questions, though? For the most part, probably a pretty good review, right, of something. You're kind of like, oh yeah, you can do that. Okay. Right. Fair enough? We'll end it there.